everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Crime with Jess. How are you all? We're nearly at the end of Jan. We're getting there. It's going to be summer again before we know it. Right, I've been asked to do this story, and I know my last story was Star Hobson, and I did mention this little man during that video, but I have been asked to have a look at this case, and to be honest, I'd already had a look at the transcripts, things like that. It's just an awful case. If you're from England and you haven't heard of this little man's name, I'd be very, very surprised, because it's absolutely everywhere. There's a picture of him at my local shop, you know, on the door. It's just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And his name's Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. So like I say, I'm pretty sure you know that name if you're from England, and certainly from Birmingham. Now, Arthur was born on the 4th of January 2014. Just such a cute boy, such a cute little man. Now, Arthur's mum is Olivia Labinjo. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I've watched quite a few videos and read quite a bit on this case, so I hope I'm pronouncing it right. So mum is Olivia Labinjo-Halcrow. Dad is Thomas Hughes. And he had a lovely extended family as well. So he's in contact with maternal grandparents, paternal grandparents. His maternal grandparents is Madeline Halcrow and Peter Halcrow. And he also had his paternal grandmother, Joanna Hughes. Now, I haven't seen his paternal grandfather's name, and obviously I do apologise if I just haven't been able to come across his name. He also had an uncle called Blake. I believe that to be Thomas's brother. So, you know, a lovely extended family, you know, a very lovely little boy. But by the time Arthur got to about 2, Thomas and Olivia had broken up. But they had shared custody, although Arthur did live with Olivia. Now, Olivia did have a problem with drink, alcohol and drugs. So not a great environment from what I've heard. Now, I'm conflicted. I'm really conflicted about Arthur's mum in all of this. So I'm going to keep my own opinions to myself, which I struggle with. But I don't know enough about her to kind of say what I'm thinking, because I could be very, very wrong. So I'm just going to tell you the facts as I know them. Now, when Olivia was 26, she was in a relationship with a guy called Gary Cunningham. A lot of alcohol involved. They met actually in a rehab facility, which to meet someone who is struggling with those sort of demons and addictions and everything else, you know, I do believe there are couples that have got each other through those sort of bad times and been able to support each other and maybe gone on to live quite happily. Olivia and Gary did not. So like I say, Olivia was 26, Gary was 29. But in late 2018, Olivia had stabbed Gary in the arm. So there was a lot of violence in the relationship. Arthur was in I'm not sure if it was a flat or a house, but he was in the property at the time that happened. So that was the one violent argument. Apparently there was many. But it said about Olivia again, I'm just going by the facts. This isn't me saying it. I do have my own opinions, but as I said, it said that she was an arch manipulator. She was very intelligent. I keep saying was, she is. Very intelligent. She did go to university. She had a way of, like I say, manipulating situations so it was made to appear that Gary was the instigator of the violence, and, you know, she was kind of put herself across as a damsel in distress type character. But in February 2019, she stabbed Gary again, quite a few times, and this time it was fatal. Now, initially in September of 2019, Olivia was sentenced to 18 years. After a retrial, it was reduced down to 11 years. The judge said she told lie after lie about just how violent Gary was. Don't understand why that would lead to a reduction in sentence, but it kind of all came about during Arthur's story, her retrial. So that was said to have had something to do with the reduction in time as well. I mean, she had mental health issues. Both her and Gary did, but let's say, you know, Gary's not here to put his side across now. So, who knows? So, after Olivia was convicted, obviously the first time, Arthur went to live with Thomas. Arthur was, he was 5 at this point. So obviously a lot of upset and upheaval for Arthur. You know, he needed some stability now in his life. And it did start off that way. It was said it was started off really well. Thomas coped very well with Arthur. They were living in like an annex at the back of Joanna Hughes, which is Thomas's mum's home. And there's an Uncle Blake in there somewhere. Now, I don't know if he lived with Joanna, but apparently he was very close to Arthur. You know, there are videos that he's recorded because Arthur was very into football, and his Uncle Blake in this particular video asked him, "Are you going to play for England?" And he was like, "Wow, I'm going to play for Liverpool." I think it was Liverpool, and then it was Tottenham, and then he'd play for England. So, you know, he had a plan in his little 5-year-old mind that who he was going to play for and where he was going to go in his future. And, you know, very cute little boy, quite quiet, but what, you know, extremely loved at that time. And, you know, trying to get him through. He's just lost his mum. You know, it would have, for a 5-year-old to understand what's happened and the circumstance and everything else, it's a lot for him to cope with. But apparently it didn't take long for him to kind of come out of himself and settle into his new life that he'd been just thrown into, basically. So he was quite and shy at first, but he relaxed and he was a really happy boy. Then we get to August 2019. Okay. At this point, Thomas was about 27, 28, met a girl called Emma Tustin. Met her on Plenty of Fish. And at this point, she was about 30, 31. Now, Emma, again, had her own issues. Thomas wasn't aware, but Emma had attempted to take her own life back in 2013. So her 2 eldest children actually live with their dad. And yeah, she kept that sort of side of her from him. But then again, you know, it was 6 years later. You know, everyone's got a past. You know, so I couldn't imagine that he would have held that against her, but she never informed him of that originally. But Emma at the very beginning tried to say that her and Arthur had become, best friends straight away, and apparently that wasn't the case. It was said that when Arthur was at Joanna's house, and Thomas was taking him out, Arthur turned around and says, Emma, is she in the car? So it was already very early days sort of seen by Thomas's family that Arthur wasn't getting on with Emma, and with Emma being the adult, it was down to her to make him feel comfortable and let him know that everything was okay and things weren't going to change with his dad, and he wasn't going to have his dad taken away from him. He'd just lost his mum. That was down to her to put those sort of things in place. And when Arthur started school, because he changed school, obviously from where he'd been at his mum's, so come the September of 2019, he changed school. And initially, it was said that he was fine, he was getting on really well, no problems. Now, in October 2019, Madeline, who is Olivia's mum, so Arthur's maternal grandmother, who'd had a very good relationship with Arthur, there'd been no problems, but all of a sudden, he meets Emma in the August, by the October, so we're only talking 2 months, all of a sudden, a message came across saying, you can't ever see Arthur again. And when she messaged Thomas and like, what are you talking about? It was just like, I've got my reasons. Okay, elaborate. Why can't I see my grandson? So from that moment in October, Madeline never got to see Arthur again. Thomas just put his foot down and he was like, no, he's done with it. Basically, he's done with that side of the family. I mean, you can't do that. Especially when Arthur's got such a great relationship with his other grandparents. But as the autumn term started to progress with Arthur, around the same time this message came across, the school was starting to notice that he was less happy. He was, scared of getting into trouble at school. He was starting to become obsessed with things like guns and death and being separated from his dad or killed by his dad. I read that somewhere else and it's like, oh my goodness, where would that come from? And Arthur, like I say, his uncle Blake, who Arthur, it was said he absolutely idolised his uncle, idolised him. He started to notice that Thomas was becoming really hard on Arthur, like ridiculously strict with him, and it just wasn't it wasn't the same relationship that had been going on when Arthur had moved, into the annex. Now, in early 2020, so, he's been with Emma a couple of months by now, Thomas would bring Arthur to his medical, assessments, and because of Arthur and the school pointing these concerns out to Thomas about Arthur's obsession with death and everything else, Thomas started bringing Arthur to medical tests and, just to see if there's anything going on. He wasn't diagnosed with anything. He was okay. He was just a young little boy who was going through things that adults would struggle with. What had happened to his mom. I don't know if he knew the details of why his mom wasn't around anymore. I don't know. Did he know she was in prison? Did he know what she'd done? I mean, I'd like to hope not. And I wouldn't have thought that he would have been told. Certainly not the details, but I don't know. Now we come to March 2020. Now, everyone watching this video will have that month and year etched in their brain for a very, very long time, because across the world we hit lockdown. You know, I know there were some countries that maybe had brought it in just before, just after, but for most people, March of 2020 was just that shock of like, what is going on? What's going on? What is happening? You know, so it was a scary time for everyone at that point. And Joanna begged Thomas during that time, because obviously we had to lock down, you had to go into your bubble, you had to, you know, whoever you were living with, you had to stay with, you know, it was a very scary time. We're still going through it, to be honest, and we can either, you know, some people choose to just get on with it, some people choose to, you know, keep that, you know, it's hard even now, but at that time, it was so scary, it was so new, and Joanna was genuinely concerned for Arthur, and she was like, please stay here, you know, during this time. We were told 2 weeks at the time, and Thomas said no, and he went to live and stay with Emma in her home. Now, Emma had a boy and a girl, I believe. I don't know if she had 4 children and the eldest 2 went to live with the dad, but I don't believe so. I think the 2 children that I mentioned quite a lot, a boy and a girl, I think they are the eldest, and I think they lived with their dad but came to Emma at weekends. That's the gist of what I'm getting about that. So I believe they're keeping them out of it as much as possible, which is very understandable. So he was staying with Emma at that time, but he did return back home because they were having arguments, you know, and so early in the relationship, but they were having some real big arguments, Thomas and Emma was. So he did bring Arthur back to his mum's in April. You know, I think, was it lifted a little bit then, where you could kind of do that? But what the reason he'd gone back is Emma's kids' dad, believe the boy and the girl that I'm talking about, their dad actually punched Thomas for hitting his son. So it seems that Thomas was a little bit hands-on. As I said, he'd been getting very strict with Arthur, so I believe hands-on, and he obviously thought he could do this with Emma's kids too. And Emma's kids obviously had a dad that wasn't going to put up with that, and he hit Thomas, and, you know, basically said, don't ever put your hands on my kids again. 100%. I mean, the fact that they were allowed to go back there while Thomas was living there, you know, it's like, but I believe the dad would have been, you know, I've made it clear, don't put your hands on my kids. So he did go back to Joanna's for a little while, and when he was there, there was some bruises seen on Arthur, on his shoulder, and Joanna, I believe it was Joanna who took the photo, but Joanna got in touch with Madeline, because Madeline, Olivia's mum, was she was a health consultant. I think she's a nurse. And when she seen the bruises where they looked quite deep layered bruises on his shoulder. She was like, that's non-accidental. Absolutely. That's non-accidental. Something needs to be done. So the photos were taken, and at the time, and Arthur had also told his nan, Joanna, that Emma was calling him like a horrible little brat and just being not very nice to him. So everyone was starting to get very concerned for Arthur's safety at the times when he's not at his nan's, when he's going to Emma's. You know, Arthur's, you know, he's going into himself. He's looking thinner. You know, he's not looking very well. So the first call to social services was actually made by Joanna, Thomas's mum. You know, so you can imagine, to phone social services on your own son to protect your grandson. it must have been very, very hard for her, really hard for her. And, I think it shows the character that it didn't matter who she was gonna what's the words I'm looking for? It didn't matter who she was calling them on. She was going to protect her grandson, So that was the first call to social services. The bruises have been shown to them. So social services they went round to Emma's apparently the next day, but there was a scene kind of set while they were there, and at that point, when social services come in, there was a ready-made story by Emma and Thomas that it was her child. She actually blamed her child, very similar to Star Hobson's story, where a young child was blamed for Star's injuries as well, and it was the same sort of thing. Oh, him and my son had a bit of a ray, and at this point, Arthur was out in the garden. He was playing. Social services didn't talk to Arthur. They didn't speak to him. They just took their words of these very manipulative, especially Emma, people, and it was said there was no safeguarding concerns for Arthur, even though these bruises looked obviously non-accidental by everyone. And with the grandmother being a healthcare professional, she was in a position to say, and to know what those bruises were. Blake, Arthur's uncle again, he made the second call to social services. Nothing done. Nothing. This family is starting to get really concerned for this little boy. The danger he was possibly in. And with them letting social services know, and social services coming back and like, no, we've been there, everything's fine. Although it would have been probably in the back of the minds, well, what about the bruises? You'd want to put your trust in that people who have been trained, and it's not new. This isn't new. I've done so many stories like this. It's horrific that this is going on, and there's people who have supposedly been trained who are going out and who are being manipulated by people who are not that bright. I know I mentioned Olivia's, Arthur's mom was intelligent, but I've seen nothing to show that Emma and Thomas were anything special by any means. So it's quite scary that these two could talk the way around it. It really is quite scary. Now, by the time we get to May 2020, so bearing in mind there's been isolation for 2 months now, the kids were actually allowed to go back to school, I think. Arthur was not. Arthur wasn't sent back to school, and many excuses obviously made for his absence that again were believed by the school. So by May 2020, this is quite upsetting, but I'm going to tell you what was going on with little Arthur. He was being abused daily by this point, and he was made to stand in the hallway. Now there is video footage because they set videos up, like CCTV. Do you call it CCTV? In the house. What? A little bit like Adrian Jones, to keep an eye on everything. I believe at this point, because Thomas was going to work, he was working through the lockdown, Emma was in charge of Arthur, and there was a lot of text messages between the two that Arthur was being nasty to Emma, and he wouldn't eat the food she was preparing for him, and I don't know what to do with him, and he's calling me all these names. These are the kind of text messages that Thomas was receiving while he was in work during the day. So by the time Thomas was getting home, he's livid with Arthur because he's believing that his son is not being very nice to his new girlfriend. Arthur's 6 by now, and he was angry at his 6-year-old little boy for not being nice to his dad. I mean, oh my God, it's you just want to go, oh my God, what are you thinking? You are beating. He was coming home and beating Arthur for not eating what Emma was serving him, and which you'll find out why. I'll let you know why. Arthur, at this point, he'd be called Satan. I can never pronounce that. Hitler, a devil child, a weasel, just all very vile little names that you'd call, that you call anybody. He's 6. He's a baby. And like I say, the reason Arthur was losing weight and the reason Arthur wouldn't eat her food that she was preparing for him, I can count on one hand the times that I've swore in my videos, and I don't like to do it. The bitch was covering his food in salt. The sandwiches she was making for him were just had salt all over them. So the poor boy was starving. And when she'd give him food, so it'd be on these cameras that she was making him food, she was making him sandwiches. And on camera, it would be seen that he was spitting it out. Now, I don't understand, as a parent, why you wouldn't, whether you heard that or seen it, you wouldn't taste the food he was eating to see, why is he doing that? He's obviously hungry. But she'd then tell, obviously, Thomas that Arthur was being disrespectful and not eating the food she's preparing, and he'd get beaten for it. Can you imagine what that child, how conflicted he was? He's starving by now. And he can't eat anything she's giving him. And to top it all off, she was refusing him water. Now, what does salt do? It dehydrates you. And she was refusing him water. He was he was being tortured. This is what was going on. This poor little boy was being tortured. He was made to stand, like I say, he was made to stand in the hallway for hours upon hours upon hours. No reason. Sort of punishment, apparently. Hours. While they're in the living room eating. There's footage of them eating McDonald's. There's footage of Emma sat up on the sofa like Queen Muck, and with an ice cream that Thomas brings into her, and then she sits down, she puts her legs on him, and you know that Arthur's in the hallway. Not big house. This isn't a big house. The hallway was next to the living room. So behind that door was a little boy who was starving. And when Emma's kids would come to visit, they'd be treated like you would treat children. They were, again, given the McDonald's. They were allowed to play outside. They had a normal life. Now, by this point, Arthur was no longer allowed to sleep in a bed, whether the other 2 children were there or not. He wasn't allowed to sleep upstairs. He had to sleep in the living room with a quilt. It's just awful. And it was said that there was messages with Emma saying, I want you, this is to Thomas, but not him. He's 6 years old. You're a mum yourself. you know, with Star Hobson, you know, Savannah Brockhill, she wasn't a parent, so a part of me thought, there's no excuses being made here, honestly, as you know, if you watch that story. But there wasn't that maternal instinct maybe there to protect Star or not want to hurt her. Emma had 2 children. She was a mom. Mother. It's not mom. We won't say mom. Mother. To 2 children. But there was just nothing. There was no love, no care, nothing for Arthur. She wanted nothing. Deep down, I think that she just had a hatred for Arthur because of his mom. Because Thomas had dared to have a relationship before her. That's what I think. I'll continue what I'm saying, and there is no defence of Thomas either. None here. The reason I'm mentioning her more is because in a lot of the incidents that happened, he actually wasn't there. And basically Arthur was seen on camera crying for his Uncle Blake. It's awful, and he's crying saying, nobody loves me. No one's going to feed me. But the nobody loves me, he says quite a few times, and it tears your heart to hear it. A little boy, like, no one was listening to him. He was just crying that nobody loves him. I mean, and to be the grandparents, to say that, not at the time, but after the fact, it's just devastating. So, like I said, on the 8th of June 2020, his school reopened, but he wasn't sent in. There's no way they'd have risked sending him in, so excuses were made over and over again as to why he wasn't in. And between the 12th and the 14th of June 2020, on camera, it's seen that Arthur spent 35 hours over the 3-day period in the hallway, standing up. He's not eating. He's being beaten. And he's been made to stand. You're torturing a 6-year-old little boy for what? For what? Oh, it's just, if he entered the living room, it should be seen on camera getting up and just boxing him and slapping him and sending him back into the hall. And also, when Thomas would get home, she'd be there, even though, look, she'd sent the messages, oh, he won't eat my food, and he doesn't like me, and he's not being very nice to me. And he won't stay in the hall when I'm telling him to. That when Thomas would come home, he'd give him a hiding. I mean, this lad going through this viciousness of the evil stepmother, you know, the case of the evil stepmother, you always hope that the child, at least when the parent is around, that they would get some sort of security from that. But he didn't even get that. He didn't even get that little bit of a breather when his dad was home, that his dad would protect him from, you know, this woman. His dad was fully involved in it. You know, his lust-lorn dad. It's just... So, on the 15th of June 2020, Emma woke up Arthur, and you can see it on camera, just by flipping his quilt and flipping him out, you know, dragging the quilt from under him, basically. And they went to her hairdresser's. Now, the hairdresser's name's Catherine Milhench. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And this goes to show the level that these two believed that, I don't know if they thought they were untouchable or they just didn't care. But Arthur was brought with them, as well as Emma's 2 children, for Emma to go and get her hair done. You know, she wants to look good. And he was made to stand in front of the door at the hairdresser's house. They didn't even try and put on a front. They didn't even, like, you know, after the fact, you know, the hairdresser could have gone, oh, he was fine when he was out. Oh, no. He was made to stand in the hallway facing a door just like he did at home. I mean, he must have maybe thought when he was heading there, you know, I might get a bit of a breather here, maybe. No, not for Arthur. And during the time she was there, now I don't know, I haven't seen it, but based on what she'd been doing up to that point, and based on Thomas's reaction when he got there, now either he just decided to be the way he was, I'm trying to keep my language to a minimum, or she was texting him to say that Arthur was messing about there at the hairdressers. But before Thomas got back from work, Emma's kids were out in the back garden having a picnic, having fun. You know, Emma's getting her hair done and looking amazing. I don't think she was looking amazing. I'm just saying that's probably what she was thinking. And Catherine says that she just, or throughout the whole day, was just like, stand up straight, face the wall. And Catherine was just, she said she didn't get what was going on. At the same time, she was of the mind frame that, you know, it's not for her to comment on how someone brings up their kids. And Emma had said, you know, he was in trouble, he's grounded, he'd been hitting her kids. You know, the girl lied through her teeth. But yeah, he spent 6 hours in somebody else's house, just stood staring at a door. And at one point, he was given a ham sandwich, pre-made by the lovely Emma, which he spat out. I wonder what was on the sandwich. And because he'd spat it out, she says he couldn't have a drink. He didn't deserve a drink because he'd spat out his sandwich. And no one knew. He was spitting it out because he was getting mouthfuls of salt down his mouth. I mean, the confusion he must have felt. I knew I'd get angry doing this story. I knew I would. I'd get really angry doing these stories, but it's like, how can a dad who up until he'd met this woman was said to have been doing okay, and you know, Arthur was coming, you know, he was looking like he was gonna be okay after what he'd just been through with his mum. Kid didn't stand a chance. Thomas had come towards the end of the appointment. He grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and called him, see you next Tuesday. You know, that's because that's what you call 6-year-olds these days. That's just what they answer to, apparently. And as they were leaving, Arthur fell over. He was so weak. He was so weak by this point. And he fell over, and Catherine said, look, Emma and Thomas made no attempt to pick him up. And he kind of got himself up and then just fell into the car. And they just drove off very quickly, it was said. And, you know, she didn't know what to do. She genuinely didn't know what to do. It's just, she couldn't believe what had just gone on throughout the day. Now we're up to 16th of June 2020. And again, CCTV in the house. Oh, it's heartbreaking. You see Arthur trying to get up. He's so thin. He's so weak. His poor little body's battered. And he's still trying to get up and pick this quilt up. It's only a single quilt. You know, it's not heavy. And the poor child couldn't lift it up. He was crying. He just woke up. So you can imagine the pain he was in. His stomach must have been in bits from the poison she was giving him, basically. And they apparently had to go back to the hairdressers again. They had to go back to Catherine's again the next day. So they all went. A bit odd, I think. Why would you all go? It's very strange. But they've all gone back to Catherine's, and again, Arthur's dragged in by the scruff of his neck. I mean, even right down to the humiliation of that. You know, just being dragged around by the scruff of your neck like you're nothing. You wouldn't do it to a dog. You wouldn't. You'd be done. You'd be done if someone seen you doing that. And again, he was made to face the door, and it was said it was like a game of ping pong, the way Thomas and Emma were just shouting at him, like taking turns, turn around, stop looking, stand up straight. You know, because he, you know, if you stood up for a certain amount of time, you start kind of wobbling and your knees start to buckle, and they would just scream at him to stand up. So Catherine actually had a partner, and he kind of came down the stairs. He could see this little boy, and he described Arthur as gaunt, malnourished, and broken. And he snuck Arthur some water. How do you have to sneak a child a drink of water? I mean, I know if you were sneaking a child, I don't know, a sneaky drink of a can of Coke or something, or, you know, some sort of fizzy drink that they're not supposed to have, but water. He's having to sneak a 6-year-old water because they've said he can't have it, and his lips were all cracked, and they noticed he was in the same clothes as the day before, and yeah, he broken was the way to describe it. Broken little boy. Oh my God. When they got home, Thomas went out. I don't know, I think he went to work actually. And it's seen on camera that at 2:29 was the final assault of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. Obviously committed by Emma, the lovely Emma, in the hallway. Now, I don't know if there is footage of it. I think there would be. I haven't seen it. I'm assuming there's footage of it for them to know what happened in the hall. But that was his final assault on a 6-year-old. And when he didn't get up, at first she called Thomas. And then Arthur's dying, and she takes a photo to send to Thomas. And it took her 12 minutes for her to finally call 999. 12 minutes of this boy collapsed, done, out. And then you hear the 999 call, and it's just, again, like Savannah Brockhill. It's not about Arthur, the call. Well, it is, but it's, oh, he's my stepson, and he was trying to hit me, and he banged his head off the floor, and, you know, he doesn't like me. The hell has that got to do with anything? And the operator's like, you know, let's do CPR, you know, as they do to take you through it. And then there's footage, look at a police footage of Emma and Thomas outside the house. And the policewoman's just basically saying, can you let us know, you know, what's gone on, what's happened? Because at this point, Arthur's been, I think he's been worked on in the ambulance. And these are the things she said. She said she put him on the thinking step. The thinking step. This girl thinks she's super nanny. Yeah. Okay, so he was on the thinking step, and she went out to him, and he headbutted her. And then he fell to the ground, and as she was bear hugging him to pick him up, he smashed his head 3 more times off the floor. You know, because he hates us. He's headbutted me. He's smashed up the house. He's battered my kids. He's battered me. He's battered his dad. This is what she's saying to the police policewoman. No concern for this child who's dying. Let's just say all of that's true. Let's just say you have a demon in your house. He's 6 years old and you're still not showing any concern for him. So even in those circumstances, even if that was true, I'd be like, but he's 6. And it's just, she's just, and then she ends it, I've done my best for that kid. Done my best for that kid. And apparently he says, yeah, I'm going to get my mum to kill ya. I hate ya. Arthur was then rushed to the Children's Hospital in Birmingham, but he was left with an unsurvivable brain injury, and he died later on that night. And that was the 16th of June 2020. He had 130 bruises and injuries on him. He'd been poisoned with salt, as we know, and his injuries actually amounted to torture. Emma Tustin was found guilty of murder, and she was given a minimum of 29 years, and this was in December 2021. Thomas was guilty of manslaughter, because like I say, although he was guilty of neglect, beating his kid, introducing him to his murderer, but he got 21 years for manslaughter. And it's just sickening. I know there was a review done on the 4th of December, I believe, to see if the actual the sentence was long enough, because the public outcry on this, along with Star Hobson, has just been, look, say his pictures down at my local shop on the door, you know, as a tribute to Arthur. I think for everyone to realise that while we were all in our homes, that children across the world probably were just being abused, and some abused so bad that they were murdered. And it's just, I think because we were all doing the same thing at that time, in the sense of we were all in isolation, you know, we were all in our bubbles and everything else. To know that was going on, it's just awful. The government have announced there will be a national inquiry into the case, just like there was for Victoria Climbier, just like there was for Baby P, Daniel Palka. The list goes on. The list, Adrian Jones. Star Hobson. You know, and the questions being asked, was lockdown partly to blame? You know, because there's been a 20% increase in reported cases of child harm and a 19% increase in child deaths. And when I watched an interview with someone from Children's Services after, you know, when this all came to light, do you want to know what she said? And the interviewers couldn't get their head around this. She basically said that when the grandmothers seen the bruises on Arthur, rather than phoning social services, what they should have done was took him to the doctor, and the doctor would have got things in place. They should have phoned social services as well, but because social services are so overwhelmed, you should have phoned the doctor as well. And it wasn't the fact that she was saying, you know, you should have took him to a doctor, that was so disgusting. It was the way she was passing off the blame, because the question was asked about social services, you know, how they dealt with the case, them going round then saying there was no concerns, no one spoke to Arthur, how were they manipulated in this way? And our answer to that was, well, if the grandmother had took him to the doctor, maybe different story. Then try to kind of pull it back and say, you know, I'm not on about this grandma, I'm just saying in future cases, you know, if you come across this, take the child to the doctor. And there was no pulling it back. The interviewers just couldn't, you could see how angry they were at her comments. And no matter what she said after it was just so, you would have prepared for that interview. You would have been prepared to justify and to try and put your case across as to what went wrong in the safeguarding of Arthur. And that was that was how you got ready for your interview, to make sure you were going to pass the blame on to his poor grandmother. Both of them. Just terrible. So they need not put her on to represent anyone from Children's Services again, because she messed up big on that interview, from my point of view. But yeah, just an awful, devastating case that it just should never have happened. Even the school when he's going in, but I suppose again it was lockdown, so they wouldn't have had many teachers in. They wouldn't have had the logistics of it. Probably didn't allow them to go around to the house like they would normally if your child's not in school, you know, for a certain amount of time. But to be honest, it was all done in a 2-month period, wasn't it? You know, it wasn't. Him and Emma weren't even together a year when she murdered Arthur. Just gotta be careful you got round your kids. It's just, you really have. You've got to be so careful, especially when you've got parents like Frankie. Was it Frankie Smith? What's her name? Frankie from Star, Hobson's Story, and Thomas Hughes. When you've got parents like that who are just going to be hanging off the word of the whatever partner they meet, and their kids are collateral damage, it's crazy to me. But I'm sorry, I know it's been a long one, but I wanted to get all the information. And, you know, I've probably still not got half of it. I've tried to get everything I can, but things will probably still keep coming out about it, just like Star Hobson. So if there are any updates or anything else to these stories, I will obviously let you know. Thank you for joining me. I don't know how to end this one. It's so upsetting, but yeah, thank you for joining me again. I really appreciate it. I've had some lovely comments. Thank you to my new subscribers and people who've liked my videos. I really, really appreciate it. I really do. And as soon as I get to that 1,000, we'll do our first live, see how we get on. Because it'd be nice to interact at the same time. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me. Take care and I'll see you soon. Thank you.